What is up, everybody? I hope you are all doing well. My name is Jason, and I'd like to take this moment to personally welcome you to my channel. Alright, so we're about halfway through the month of May, which means we're also halfway through Asian American Heritage Month. And I guess to be fair, because no month can just be one thing anymore, it's also National Barbecue Month, National Bike Month, National Blood Pressure Month, which really should be given attention year-round, and last but not least, National Gifts from the Garden Month. And I guess as a side note, I should say I'm not offended that they tried to cram all of these like holidays, so to speak, into the same month that Asian American Heritage was supposed to be celebrated. It's more like, why? Like, do these things sound like anything that an Asian American would want to celebrate? Like barbecue sauce, maybe. Bikes, I mean, you have those in China already. I don't understand why you'd have to be Asian American to appreciate a bike. And it's like, if I were to build Asian American Heritage Month from scratch, right? I wouldn't throw those things in there. It would be like National Take Your Shoes Off Inside Month, or National Why You Look So Fat Month, or like National Henry Golding Appreciation Month. I'm speechless. Just like common sense things. But the main point is that in honor of Asian American Heritage Month, I want to share with you guys something that's very close to my heart, which is Asian American history. Specifically, what I want to share with you guys is just an amazing, borderline unbelievable story about the 442nd Infantry Regiment, which was a segregated Japanese American combat unit that fought for America in World War II. And yes, you did hear me right. I said segregated combat unit. Much like the famous Tuskegee Airmen, who were a group of segregated all-black fighter pilots during World War II, the 442nd Infantry was composed entirely of Asian American soldiers. And to answer your second question, yes, that's two different racial groups being completely segregated while fighting for their country during World War II. Yeah, so some people didn't really like the food on their plate to touch back then, if you know what I mean. But thank God that's all over with, huh?
One Asian advocacy group says it has received more than 1,500 reports of COVID-related hate incidents since mid-January.
The video, horrifying. An Asian American minding his own business as a total stranger berates him before spraying him with Febreze.
The unarmed black man was chased and shot down while running through a Georgia neighborhood. He was jogging at the time.
Nigga.
So in order to really appreciate the story of the 442nd, I think it's very important to take a step back to kind of understand what was going on in the country at that time. If we rewind all the way back to December 7th, 1941, we get what is the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor. Basically, at this time, the United States wasn't involved in World War II, so the attack was a complete surprise to them, and it left the country furious, up in arms. People all across the nation were like, those samurai sons of bitches did what? In the end, the attack on Pearl Harbor kind of pushed the United States into World War II, and it led to a surge of patriotism within the country. There were hundreds and thousands of young Americans volunteering to fight for this country, and this includes young Asian Americans and specifically young Japanese Americans. But unfortunately, when young Japanese Americans or young Asian Americans went to go volunteer to fight for their country, they were told flat out, no, you can't. And to make matters worse, everyone was starting to get real suspicious of each other. And when I say everyone, I meant Americans were suspicious of Japanese Americans and Asian Americans. They were all kind of looking at each other like, did you immigrate all the way to this country to spy on us? So obviously there was a growing tension between Americans and Japanese Americans, and there really shouldn't be any sort of distinction in that sentence, by the way. But nevertheless, in that time, yes, there were very large, very real tensions growing between the two groups. And things reached kind of a climax when a few months later, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president of the United States, signed Executive Order 9066. So Executive Order 9066 essentially gave the federal government the authority to take anyone of Japanese ancestry in America and place them in internment camps regardless of citizenship status. And basically, just like that, thousands of Japanese men, women, and children were taken from their schools, their businesses, their homes, just their lives in general, uprooted, placed in another state to be put in internment camps. And if you think that's f***ed up, wait till you hear this part. So a few months or maybe a year into the war, after the United States has entered the war, they realize that they are short on manpower. So what do? They waltz themselves up to the Japanese, whom they've already denied the right to serve in the military, and placed in internment camps, and said, hey, can you guys help us fight this war? And you know what? They said yes. And amazingly, just like that, the 442nd was born. I mean, we're talking about Japanese American who, until essentially that day, were the victims of constitutional injustices that are beyond my comprehension, so quickly stood up and volunteered to say, yes, I still love this country, I will fight for this country. Now, from what I understand, the 442nd was composed mostly of Hawaiian-born Japanese Americans, while the rest of the unit was formed of mainland-born Japanese Americans. And like most segregated units in history, they were sent on the most dangerous of missions. But despite being put in so many dangerous situations, the 442nd was able to achieve more than anyone expected. And that, of course, brings us to the main event of this video, which is how the 442nd was able to successfully take the Gothic Line. So the Gothic Line was essentially a stronghold held by German soldiers at the bottom of the Apennine Mountains in Pisa, Italy. What they had done is dug trenches at the foot of the mountain, and then they armed those trenches with, I think, 2,300 machine guns, all pointed in one direction, because behind them were the actual mountains, which were about 3,000 feet tall, very steep, and made of some sort of marble material, from what I was reading. So they figured it was impossible to climb from that side. They didn't risk any sort of flank or outmaneuver that way. And for them, it was just, shooting fish in a barrel, just straight on. Anytime an enemy came toward them, they were able to take them out. So obviously, in order for the Allies to continue their campaign through Italy, they had to break through the Gothic Line. But because they were outgunned, outpositioned, they weren't really able to get past the German soldiers. So for about 6 months, they were in a stalemate. And that is where the 442nd comes in. In late March 1945, the 442nd was sent in to help break through the Gothic Line, and by April, they had devised a plan. Like I said earlier, the Germans thought that their stronghold at the foot of the mountain was pretty much impenetrable. From the front, they could cover everything with machine gun fire, and behind them they had the actual mountains that they thought no one could scale because it was too steep, too high, and really too slippery, again, because it was the marble-like minerals that made up the mountain. And I think you know where I'm going with this, but the 442nd planned to actually scale the mountain from behind overnight to outflank the German soldiers and take the line. They did this in partnership with the 100th Battalion Combat Unit, which was also a Japanese American unit, and together for 8 hours in the pitch black, those men scaled an entire mountain in one night. But the truly memorable part of this story, for me at least, is that whenever one of these men lost their footing in the darkness and ended up falling, they didn't make a single sound on the way down. As they were falling to their deaths, they thought enough of their comrades to not give away their position to the enemy by falling silently, ultimately, to their deaths. But eventually, those who did successfully scale the mountain, those who made it to the top, waited until daybreak, and they were successfully able to stage a surprise attack against the Germans, obviously with the combined forces of the soldiers who had not scaled the mountain, and ultimately they took the line. So by the end of World War II, it was recorded that over 18,000 Japanese Americans had served in the 442nd, and that unit ended up being the most decorated unit in World War II. They had over 9,000 Purple Hearts distributed amongst its members and 21 Medals of Honor. And I mean, just to think that a few years prior, these people were interned in Japanese internment camps, it's absolutely astonishing. So as we celebrate Asian American Heritage Month this May, I implore you to be thoughtful of the actions of the 442nd. Obviously, there's a lot going on right now that affects the Asian American community, but just remember there is a way to rise above. So that's going to do it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun making it, learning about it, and I hope you guys learned something too. Like any historian, I will leave a bibliography of sorts in the description below. If you like this video, if you could please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe.